Hello, everybody. For our last presentation of the day, we have Paul Gardner-Stephen, who will talk about the Mega65, his work on it, how it came to be, and how it has developed, how he thinks it has developed in all this time. So take it away, Paul.
The joys of technology, right?
Yes.
This is why we want simple computers like the Mega65 that just work. Which there's a whole story on that we might get to as well in there. Okay, so if we're good to go,
Okay, we're going to cut the volume on all our computers in the room. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, super. After the minor technical interlude there, so I'm curious who there today has physically used or who owns a Mega65.
Nobody.
There's one active.
Nobody. Oh, one. Yay!
Only Robert.
I hope that will change over time. So so let's start out how the Mega65 project actually kind of kicked off. So if we wind all the way back to the mid 1990s. So at that time, obviously, I had a Commodore 64, and I was, coding bits and pieces and using it. Who's used the 64net software from back in the 90s for connecting a Commodore 64 to a PC? I'm not sure how much that was around in the US. So that was something that I'd written back in the mid 90s, and it was mostly being sold in Germany. And the guy who was selling it for me in Germany got one of the original Commodore 65 prototypes from the clearance. And he used to just kind of send me, the odd bits and pieces. And so one day this Commodore 65 turned up completely unannounced, and he said, "Oh, I thought you might like to have one of these," because he'd paid a whole 100 Deutschmark for it or something, right? This is even before the euro. And I'm like, "Yeah, this is a pretty cool thing." It wasn't perfect, but I'll tell you what, as a coding machine, being able to, assemble at 3.5 megahertz, being able to use the built-in 3.5-inch floppy drive, this was really, really lovely. And so I really quite enjoyed using, the C65 as my primary machine for a number of years, actually, because I was lucky that I actually got one of the ones that worked. If it was one of the ones that didn't work, then it would have been a very different story. So I really enjoyed using it. And also around that time, I'd had some ideas around how to make an even faster accelerator for the Commodore 64. So I'm not aware that anyone's actually made an accelerator using this method yet. I did some experiments with a cartridge to prove that it could work. And the trick, so it doesn't work on a 128, but on a C64, if you pull the read-write line from read to write whenever the CPU is accessing memory, the RAM shuts up and is listening and says, "Okay, give me a byte and I'll store it for you." So at that point, you can then feed in the correct byte from a cartridge. So you could have a CPU at any speed you like. And all it has to do is to watch the bus for the memory accesses made by either the VIC-2 or the CPU. And if they're accesses to RAM, it can actually just feed the correct value through. So you end up with a perfectly synchronous cache in terms of the video output, which normally was what was glitchy, like with a super CPU, for example. If you turned the CPU up to full speed, you could have video glitching as the write back kind of went through. And so I kind of worked at this idea for doing an accelerator based on that, and thought, oh, that'd be great to do. Didn't have the skills and the technology at the time was a little bit on the edge to do that easily. So I kind of sat on that idea for like 15 years. And then I was working at a university. I'd learned about FPGAs and learned to do some VHDL. And I thought, FPGAs are the right way to do this. And so I kind of waited until they got cheap enough and thought, yep, I'm going to make that accelerator now. So around late 2013, I started implementing a fast 6502 on an FPGA development board. In fact, on this very FPGA development board here.
Oh, wow.
And thought, okay, yep, I'm going to make that accelerator. By that time, I had also sold the Commodore 65 to fund some humanitarian work that I was doing through the university. And I thought, actually, you know what? I miss having the Commodore 65. I'm actually just going to re-implement the entire Commodore 65 in this FPGA. And so that was actually how the project started. And so I got it to the point where, like in late 2014, it could boot a Commodore 65 ROM to BASIC, and sort of implementing various bits and pieces. And then a very important thing happened. Detlef from the Museum of Electronic Games and Art in Frankfurt in Germany reached out to me and said, I saw what you're doing with this. This looks really cool. We also resurrect crazy old retro technology. Would you like to work with us to make the whole machine? So prior to that, I was working on it on my own, right? And so the opportunity to actually work on it, with a team of interested people rather than just doing it, all by myself. I'm like, why wouldn't I want to? And of course, the Mega, as the museum is called, they've done some really great stuff. If you look for their Tennis for Two, so this is the first analog computer game that was made effectively on an oscilloscope screen in the 50s, I think. I'm probably going to get this wrong. But if you look for Tennis for Two and for Mega, you'll see this crazy hybrid analog digital thing that they managed to resurrect as well. And so I knew that they were capable of doing good stuff. And so in a sense, the rest, as I say, is all history. Because if it was up to me, at best, what we'd have is the FPGA board in a C64 case using a C64 keyboard, probably. But the team at Mega said, no, you know what? We actually want to make the whole machine, and we want to do it, as something which is really beautiful and really excellent to use. And so, as the one of you who's used one, I'm just going to have to reach over to change the camera view here a little bit. So now hopefully you can see me through the Mega 65 keyboard.
Yes.
That we had this beautiful mechanical keyboard. It's got the front printing on the keys. We've got the badge, and again, I used a real C65 for over a decade, and this thing just looks and feels like a C65. This is, of course, my workbench unit, actually with an extra C65 board in there that I'm doing some work on. But we have the real floppy drive, we have the main board, we've got all of the the connections, network, digital video, analog audio, real joystick ports, all of that stuff, is there on the machine in this beautiful injection molded case. And so that would never have happened without the work. Probably we've averaged, I reckon, half a dozen people working half time on this machine over the better part of a decade, to get it out. So there's something like 30 person years of effort from all sorts of volunteers to get the machine to where it is. So the the user guide now is like 1,200 pages, of really good content. That and it looks like the C64 reference guide. So if you go to the files.mega65.org, you can download the monster PDF for the complete compendium, or there's kind of separate volumes. If you have if you want to ring bind them and have the the nice lay flat binding and everything, and that comes in the box, you get just the user guide in that kind of format. So we really wanted to make that feeling of Christmas 1985-ish, that for many of us of getting, a nice brand new 8-bit computer and then going to explore it, or, the same with the Amiga as well, right? That there was just, it sets off this process of joyous discovery and exploration as you try and work out what's possible. Like, that when we first heard, a game like Impossible Mission with digital speech on the C64, we're just like, what? What's going on here? And then, and we keep seeing, even now, right? It's only in the last 5 years that, full, like almost CD quality digital audio has been extracted out of the SID chip, right? So there's, 30, 40 years of joyous exploration that has come out of the C64. And so our goal in the C65 really was to replicate that right from, getting this thing in the beautiful package that looks like it's, as I say, fallen out from under a Christmas tree in the early 80s, with a lovely manual, the beautiful physical form, and then, that chance to explore this machine over coming decades. So one of the influences in doing it as a complete open source project was seeing other things like the C1 that came out and then basically died because it wasn't open. So like the guys in Mega have got a couple of C1s, and I can't remember whether they've managed to finally get one working again, because the schematics aren't public, the FPGA bit streams that it needs aren't public, and so without the support of the developer, you're stuffed, and the platform dies. And so we wanted really to avoid that, and instead, create a platform that can outlive all of us, so that, give it 10, 20, 30 years when we're all, annoying the staff in a nursing home, or hopefully, living disgracefully in our own homes, that, we can still be there, using these machines and having fun, and in communication with one another, and just still enjoying something which has brought us so much pleasure and joy, and made us actually who we are in terms of for many of us, our ability to program and engage with computers in a serious manner actually comes from those deep understandings that we get from, if you like, the nakedness of an 8-bit computer. There's not all these layers of abstraction hiding what's going on from you. So that was kind of the context that led all of the design decisions in what we're doing. So we've worked really hard to make it compatible with the original C65, so you can use unmodified C65 ROMs. And in fact, you can use all of the C65 ROMs that are known to exist in the Mega 65, whereas in a real C65, you have to use particular versions of ROMs that match the hardware revision of the various custom chips that are in the C65 that you have, assuming that they work, right? So the floppy controller had changes over time. The DMA controller had changes over time, in particular. And so you were much more limited than what you are with the Mega 65. And even going further than that, because it's FPGA based, we've made it so that the Mega 65, you can load up different cores for it to be completely different 8 or 16-bit or even potentially 32-bit computers. So there's already a Game Boy Color core, so you can actually play a variety of Game Boy Color games on the Mega 65, which is really fun. There's a Spectrum ZX core, so you don't need to buy a Next. You can just use your Mega 65, as that. In fact, I think someone was even starting work on an X16 core for the Mega 65, and there's work on an Amiga, porting the ECS and AGA Amiga cores to the Mega 65. So certainly ECS will definitely be possible. The AGA might need a RAM expander in the trapdoor slot of the Mega 65, but I'm quietly hopeful that an unaccelerated A1200 should be quite possible to do. And again, you've got the internal 3.5-inch floppy drive, so you can actually just slap your Amiga discs in and have that whole real feeling. And it's actually interesting that the floppy drive has been one of the most contentious issues in the Mega 65. From our perspective, it just had to be there, because if we were making a new C65, the old one had one, so the new one had to have one. And that the case has a very iconic, distinctive shape. Again, some people love the forward-facing floppy drive with its beer holder, as people often call that kind of shelf piece. Other people can't stand it, but it's what makes a C65 a C65. In the same way that if you had an SX64 that didn't weigh 15 kilos, it wouldn't be an SX64 anymore, right? Or if you tried to make it shallower instead of being capable of used as a lethal weapon against a crowd of thugs, just from its sheer size and heft, right? So there's, if you like, some of it's cute, right? Ugly but interesting, is the way that some of these unique design features should be viewed if they're not your favorite. But anyway, so the Mega 65 has that floppy drive. Well, because the C65 has it, it's good for Amiga, or even when we get around to porting, a 386 or 486 DOS machine from Mister, because there's a framework now for porting Mister cores. So anyone who wants to get their hand into into FPGAs and VHDL to great benefit to the community, porting these cores across is a great way to do that. You don't have to get as deep into the FPGA programming, and there's a community of folks out there that can help you with the porting, and then you'll make something available that adds tremendously to the Mega 65 community. Which, speaking of which, there's now, where are we? There's 925 delivered machines, and I think there's another 600 to 800 on back order. We're hoping that those will all get shipped out later this year. Again, Chipageddon and all of these sorts of things notwithstanding. So we're just absolutely delighted at the size and the vibrancy of the community. One of the things that we've actually really noticed about the Mega 65 community is that a lot of the developers from the C64 kind of scene have gravitated over to it, because it really is a developer's or a developer friendly machine. There's lots of tools that we've made for working on it. Again, that whole that wonder of exploration that they had with the C64, they're getting to have all over again, which just adds to that sense of being back in the 80s. And talking about the 3.5-inch floppy drive, there's nothing quite like turning on an 8-bit machine and hearing the floppy drives chug and grind and seek, and then there's a ready prompt there in front of you in 3 seconds time. You can get things like the C64 and the A500, which like they're great at their price point, they're fantastic, but they don't get you that full suspension of disbelief. When you sit at a Mega 65, you flick that power switch on, and you're typing a basic program in within 3 seconds. Whether you're working out your taxes or doing all sorts of crazy stuff that you can do in BASIC, or loading up a favorite game. There is nothing to break that magic feeling that you're at a real computer, because you are at a real brand new 8-bit computer. So we're delighted that so many people that have got a Mega 65, and they report back to us and they're like, "Oh, I'm in love with the keyboard. It feels like I'm back in in my childhood, pardon me, or teenager years." And that feeling is what we wanted to create. And it was interesting. Some of it is luck, but we also took a number of steps to do that. So our memories actually kind of grow rose tinted with time. So particularly for some people who haven't been using 8-bit computers a lot in the meantime, and that have come back, for them being able to have the SD card for disk image storage and those sorts of things, so that it's not as inconvenient and clunky. And actually the C65 architecture of having the built-in floppy drive which fits more and is faster, also actually provides some of that kind of immediately as well. But the improvements that we made on the C65 architecture, because we could in the FPGA, also kind of follow on that. So compared to some of the other retro machines, and so there's great work. I love what Stephanie has done with the Phoenix machines, and 8-bit guy with the X16. What they've achieved is fantastic, and we love seeing the variety that's out there in the retro space. Of course, we're biased, as all of these projects are. We think ours is better, right? Because it is. But don't tell anyone. But one of the reasons that we think the Mega 65 has been so successful is that it has that bridge of familiarity, right? When you turn it on, if you hold down the Mega key, which is there instead of the Commodore key, it just boots up as a C64, as the C65 did, as the 128 did. And so you can get started straight away without having to learn anything new. And actually, one of the nice things the C65 has over the 128 is that you can access all of the the additional features of the machine from C64 mode. There's kind of some magic register values you write in places, and then it unlocks all of the raw power of the C65 and indeed of the Mega 65 in that. So unlike the 128 where you kind of had to go, right, I have to get my head around this kind of different memory map and the 128 MMU from the beginning, on the C65 and Mega 65, it's super easy. You can go, yep, I'm going to turn the CPU up to 3.5 or to 40 megahertz on the Mega 65 because that's its maximum clock speed. And you can start doing things, and you can start doing things with the improved graphics. You can start using the multiple SIDs. So the Mega 65 implements 4 SID chips in there. So you've got 6 SID channels on the left and 6 SID channels on the right, which is just fantastic. It also has Amiga style digital audio with the DMA driven. So you can write a basic program that actually plays audio samples without taking any time from the CPU. And unlike the Amiga, you can pan each of those 4 channels anywhere you like, from full hard left to full hard right, or a balanced stereo in between. So the sound on the Mega 65 is already really nice, and at least it's better than the Amiga or the C64 because it's got, in fact, improved versions of both of their audio subsystems. One of the things that we thought really hard about actually was what we did with the video chip. So we're all familiar with the VIC-2 on the C64, and it's all based around characters, even the graphics mode, right? You've got these, there's 8 bytes in a row that go down like a character, because internally it's actually just a character mode with the character positions set, and some changes to the way it does the color. On the C65, in that era, bit planes were a bit in fashion. And so the engineers at Commodore implemented, and remember that it was first worked on in 1987. So this is well before the AGA Amigas. If they'd bought the C65 out quickly with its 8 bit planes, so 256 color from 4K color palette, and 640 by 400. In fact, the C65 can do 1280 by 400 in this kind of very bizarre interlaced horizontally and vertically bit plane mode. It would have knocked the socks off and been quite successful in the marketplace. As it was, they took so long to get around to doing anything that it was dead before it was ready to be released. And so, as we know, it was never commercially released. But the bit planes, unfortunately, had a few problems. So on the Amiga, with the bit planes, you can set, if you like, the virtual width of the bit plane, and you can set the start address of the bit plane anywhere you want. So you can do hardware scrolling just by changing which piece of the bit planes you're displaying. So that gives you tremendous, flexibility and power for making games. On the C65, the bit planes were stuck effectively as VIC-2 bitmap screens at fixed addresses, and so you couldn't do that hardware scrolling. And at 3.5 megahertz, even with a DMA controller, you actually can't scroll the entire screen with 8 bit planes, in real time, because you have tearing, because it can't happen in the vertical blank time because it will take too many CPU cycles. So they were kind of some issues. And then if you use all 8-bit planes, you can potentially use up all 128 kilobytes of your RAM. So yeah, in retrospect, the bit planes weren't the best idea for a low-cost 8-bit machine that they were designing. So we've implemented on the Mega 65 for backward compatibility, and actually BASIC uses them for its graphics modes until we get around to making an improved graphics library for BASIC 65. But we thought, okay, hang on, if we were to reimagine it and not imagine the Amiga had never existed, and that bit planes were never in fashion, how might have the VIC-3 been created? And so that was really how we went about designing the VIC-4. So we went, well, Commodore's approach, when they made the VIC-2, actually was to look at all of the other machines that were around at the time and pinch all of their good ideas. And we thought, well, the contemporaries for the C65 really in mid 87 was actually arcade games. And most arcade games actually used a very Commodore 64 feeling function. They had tiled video modes. So effectively they were character modes that had more colors in them than what the C64's graphics modes had. And this has a bunch of advantages, not the least of which is for the typical platformer games where you've got large blank areas of the screen, you're not wasting any memory because you can reuse the same characters. And even you think about lots of the games on the C64, they actually use text mode rather than bitmap mode so that they can just move the characters around. Like, Boulder Dash is a great example, right? It's using a 2K character set to draw, all of the levels. Impossible Mission, right? Similar kind of thing. They're using a character set to draw the platforms, and this means they can scroll it faster, but importantly, it saves lots more RAM for doing interesting things. And so that's how we implemented it on the Mega 65. We took the character modes and went, okay, it'll be great to have more than 256 unique characters so that you can tile them over the whole screen if you want. So we added what we call 16-bit text mode, which really actually just means that there is 2 bytes of screen memory and 2 bytes of color memory per character position instead of just 1. And that lets us add, instead of being limited to 256, we've got 13 bits available for the character number. So that's 8K unique characters you can have on the screen at a time. And there's also some extra flags in there. So you can flip a character horizontally, you can flip it vertically, you can shift it up pixel by pixel, you can shift it down pixel by pixel within that character cell. So you can actually have, full character rendered, like sprites that you can place anywhere you like a sprite, but they can be any size because they're made of character graphics. So that alone actually is tremendously powerful and adds to what the Mega 65 can do. And then we added a flag that lets you say, well, now we want the characters to not be 1 bit per pixel, which is what all the C64 character modes are. You either make the pixels twice as wide to get 2 bits, or you make them half the width and have 1 bit to pick the color. We've added what we call nibble color mode, where you've got 4 bits per pixel, so 16 colors, or full color mode. So now you can have each pixel in an 8x8 character being selected from any of the colors in the 256 color palette. In actual fact, there's 2 256 color palettes, and you can pick which one each character comes from. So you can have 512 colors on the screen super easily. And again, you're putting characters on the screen where you want. So you can make a game in BASIC that actually has 256 color graphics and can be animated quite quickly. So that gets it pretty close to arcade style graphics. And then we thought, okay, do we add more sprites to the Mega 65? The sprites on the VIC-2 actually took up about 2/3 of the video chip. And we're finding a similar kind of thing. If we wanted to have more general purpose sprites on the VIC-4 for the Mega 65, that it was going to really bog the design down and make it really big. So instead what we did was a much cheaper thing that, again, could have been done in the 1980s. We put a little memory in the VIC-4 instead that is big enough to fit the graphics on 1 raster line. So what the VIC-4 does is it draws in this buffer on the previous raster line before it shows it on the next raster line. And so you do your normal kind of, draw across it once. That's the normal way that happens. But again, with some of those extra flags in the characters, you can actually say, right, now I want you to go back to pixel 43 and now start drawing some more characters over the top. And this happens in real time every raster line. So if you have a look at, there's on YouTube, there's videos of the game First Shot. That's being made for the Mega 65 at the moment, and it has parallax scrolling and has lots of the spaceships and lots of the bullets all flying around, way more than 8, and many of them much larger than a sprite. And this is how this is being done with the raster rewrite buffer. And one of the magic things about the raster rewrite buffer is it doesn't take any CPU time because the video, a bit like on the C64 or on the VIC-20, right? You've got the CPU access to the memory, and then you've got the video access to the memory. But the Mega 65 doesn't have to steal CPU cycles to feed the video chip. It's got enough bandwidth to do all of this on its own half of the memory bus. So you can have these fantastic graphics all moving around, and your CPU is completely free. Like on the Amiga, your audio can be done out of DMA, so that's also not requiring the CPU's attention. And that really then leaves your CPU free to do, everything that you want, again, with the 40 megahertz, you've got plenty of horsepower there to do some really kick butt stuff on the machine. And I'm quite confident really to say that what the Mega 65 is doing at the moment is, I think, like with what the C64 was doing in its first years of release, nowhere near what people will extract out of the machine, in the years and decades to come. So yeah, we hope that we've created this excellent, fun journey for people to be involved in. And we're out of the starting blocks, and we're having that joy and exhilaration, as we start, running down the track to see what we can find and what will happen, and do some really good, fun stuff with that. So, in terms of some other more recent things that we're working on, this is an expansion board for the Mega 65. So there's gear on my blog. Well, so if you haven't seen my blog, c65gs.blogspot.com. There's lots of stuff there as I develop the machine that I document as I go along. So even if you're not interested in buying the machine, there's lots of kind of interesting stories and adventures as we make this thing. But this expansion board adds in some of the missing ports that the standard C65 motherboard doesn't have to try and limit its cost. So sorry about the if you can switch camera, and we should be able to get it better on the other camera. Okay, that hopefully will be better. So we have a user port because the Mega 65 by default doesn't have a user port. We also have the analog video output. So you can plug it into an old CRT tube. So that's one of the more recent things that I've got working.
There you go.
NTSC color is still coming, but we already have PAL color working and NTSC monochrome working, which is really nice. This is for a C65 specific external disk drive, which we're going to make work. And one of the things that even the original C65 didn't have, a tape port. We're going to have a tape port on there, partly just for completeness, but actually one of the things that's been really fun with the disk drive, for me at least, has actually been going, well, if we're a bit smarter about how we use the disk drive or the tape drive, can we, without data compression, so this is actually just pure better signal processing and design, can we fit more data onto these storage media? So the audio, so the tape port on a C64, we know can actually do much more than what the standard loaders could do, but it was relatively hard to go above a certain speed. Maybe we can fit more on tape, or maybe we can do crazy things like record analog audio onto tape by switching that really, really fast to approximate the analog waveforms. So I think there's going to be some fun to be had with that. And already for the disk drive, again, if you have a look on the blog, you can see more details about it. So who here remembers when there were MFM and RLL hard drives back in the DOS era?
Oh, yes.
Yep, I see a couple of hands.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you could get yourself an RLL controller, like you were happy as a pig in mud, right? Because you got 50% extra hard disk storage out of your existing hard drive, right? And some MFM drives tolerated that fine. Others, you'd be formatting your hard drive every 6 weeks to deal with the bit rot. But you didn't care, right? Because you got 60 meg out of your 40 meg hard drive, so you could have Windows 3.1 and a couple of games installed on your machine, right? No one, when I looked into it, has actually ever implemented RLL on a floppy drive. Right? But the same signal processing techniques actually work for it. Is it possible? Will the drive electronics on a floppy drive support RLL? One of the nice advantages we have with the Mega 65 is, there's a whole story in this itself, trying to get 3.5-inch floppy drives, right, to put in new machines is, shall we say, difficult. So the Mega 65 uses refurbished 3.5-inch floppy drives that came out of a large quantity of Dell machines somewhere in Europe. They are all identical outs drives. So the electronics are identical on them. So if I can make something work on the one that's here in front of me, it will work on every other Mega 65 floppy drive. So that's, again, it's a bit like with the old C64 and Amiga days, right? You had this consistency of hardware that let you push the limits. So I went, okay, can I implement an RLL controller? Because I already had to implement the MFM controller for the 1581 compatible work in it. And it turns out that you can. You don't get quite 150% storage on the floppy drive for a variety of complicated reasons to do with the way that the floppy drive is trying to, the electronics on it actually already try and squelch out errors. But the other interesting thing is that it works better the faster you make the data rate for some of these kind of related reasons. And standard 3.5-inch, well, all the PC floppy formats, right, didn't change the number of sectors per track because, in the early 80s, it was too expensive to have a variable oscillator to set the data rate. So unlike the 1541 that had the 4 zones, right, for the data density, that let it fit quite a bit more on because the outside tracks are physically 50% longer than the inside tracks. Standard PC floppy drive controllers never did that either. So the early Macs did. And so we can implement that very easily with a variable oscillator in the FPGA. And actually, in fact, we don't even need a variable oscillator. There's an even easier way to do it. So we've implemented that. So we can get, oh, goodness gracious me. So instead of on a high density disk, normally you would get 18 sectors per track. We can get something like 40 sectors on the outside tracks and 32 sectors on the inside tracks. So this is, again, there's no compression in this. This is just actual, genuine, real sectors. We can get a little over 3 megabytes on a standard 1.44 meg floppy disk on a standard 1.44 meg floppy drive in the Mega 65. And so that's going to be interesting, I think, as we see more demos come out for the Mega 65, that we'll probably have a couple of standard competition formats. One will be whatever you can fit on an 880K or 800K double density disk. And another standard will be what you can fit on a high density 1.44 meg floppy disk. And again, so then the ability to vary some of these encoding parameters on a disk by disk basis, because of the way that the Mega 65 lets you do that, will let the demo coders try and find interesting ways to fit more on. And what's interesting, actually, the more you fit in a floppy disk, the faster the data transfer is. So we can now load from the outside tracks at about 100K a second, which is completely nuts, right? Compared to the theoretical data rate on the 1581 was like 10 or 15K a second. So you're doubling it for double density, and then you kind of you're multiplying it by almost 1.5, twice over for these other kind of improvements. So yeah, that's just sort of one area of exploration. So we hope that as in the past, people with their different areas of interest in different areas will focus on different aspects of the Mega 65 and and exploit it to do things that we haven't intended, and to do things that bring joy to the community. Because at the end of the day, that is the purpose of the Mega 65, is to bring joy to the community. So one of the other aspects of that, we know the machine's not the cheapest machine on the market, because doing it right isn't cheap. And actually, it's interesting, the only reason the Mega 65 has already actually had so many units delivered in the middle of COVID, right, was that our supply chain doesn't work through cheap Chinese manufacturers. So it's being made in Germany and Austria, with that quintessential German quality to it. The motherboard is made in Germany. All of that is happening over there. But if you want a lower cost way to make the machine, you can actually still buy these the FPGA development boards that I started out on. We still support that. The Mega 65 supports a bunch of different boards, and so that's a much cheaper way if you want to kind of ease in to working with the machine. So yeah, there's lots of different stuff in there. And if you have an interest in electronics, with some of these expansion boards, we're working on other add-ons and things as well. there's lots of opportunity for folks to get involved and and enjoy the process. Or if you just want to use the machine and play your favorite games and that kind of thing, then that's good and fine as well. So yeah, that's probably enough of me monologuing for a while though. So I'd love if there are any questions or thoughts or whatever, throw it at me.
Paul, what is your opinion? This is just a silly little question. What is your opinion of people replacing the Mega 65 badge with a Commodore 65 badge?
So the whole Commodore branding thing, right? So as we know, this has just been an absolute debacle for the last 2 decades, right? So so there's a Dutch company that owns the trademark to the Commodore name, right?
Right.
So we approached them and said, look, we are making this machine. It will add value to your trademark by actually making it relevant again. You can imagine all the media that you would get from, Commodore releasing a new machine in this day and age. And we said, we think it makes all the sense in the world. We were happy to pay them a reasonable royalty. And they really seem to have very little interest. A complication is that they've licensed the name in Germany to individual computers, I think. And so they were kind of like, oh, you need to get permission from them. But actually, the way that they've licensed it to them, he can't give us permission. So there's this whole... it's just the usual sad quagmire of Commodore licensing, unfortunately. But we're actually really happy now that actually the Mega 65 doesn't need the Commodore brand. That everyone knows what it is. And if people want to pop the badge out and put a Commodore 65 badge in and patch the ROMs to say Commodore 65 instead of Mega 65, like whatever brings you joy, right? If that's what you need to complete the suspension of disbelief that you're sitting here using this unicorn from the 1980s, like we love it, right? And it's again, when people start modifying something that you produce, then you know that they love it, right? Because you're going like, yep, I've bought one, I want to use it, and now I'm going to make it my own and make it even better, right? So we love that people are doing that.
Another question. Did you contact any of the original Commodore engineers that worked on the Commodore 65?
So the guys in Germany have been in contact with a number of them, and oh goodness, there's David Haney and a bunch of the folks. So I've spoken with Paul Lasser and Fred Bowen a little bit as well. And it's kind of interesting, right? So you have to understand where the C65 came in the history of Commodore to understand the mixed emotions that a lot of these folks have around the machine. So there is an aspect where it was the last machine they got to work on to design and make because of the dysfunction that was growing in Commodore at that time. And so there is a fondness of it, if you like, as their youngest child from that marriage. But at the same time, there is particularly amongst the folks who worked on the Amiga, there is tremendous frustration that the company didn't give them the resources to do what they should have done, which is actually work on the AGA chipset much earlier, and instead had them working on this other thing because that's all they could get the resources to do. And yeah, so it's this kind of mixed kind of thing. So in person, I think they're great. They love to see that it's there, but it's kind of, it does bring up, mixed memories for many of those folks. Is my, perspective of it, looking at it from the outside.
Interesting. There was an engineer that's named as like maybe the father of the C65, Bill Gardet, I believe.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And every time I listen to the CB engineers talk about this Bill Gardet, who I know nothing about, they say, he was a loner. He worked on it all by himself. We don't know. We were not in contact with him much. So is that your feeling that you got from them also?
Not specifically on that. Again, it wasn't a well-resourced project, is my understanding, right? I think it actually started as a bit of a skunk works early on, and so that might explain some of that. But then later on, it kind of did get some official backing. So once they were contracting folks out to work on the ROMs and all of those sorts of things, right? So I think when and where you were in Commodore at different stages of the process, you end up with a very different view of what went on.
Okay. Have you seen the Commodore 65 Java online version there that they have online?
Yeah, so there's a couple of online emulators. So actually, XEMU 65, which is it's also the official Mega 65 emulator, is made by LGB, a guy out of, oh goodness gracious me, Hungary, I think he's in. So he made a version of his that could also run on a web browser at some point. But the Java one, because there was a high 65 or something, which is really just a high level.
High 65.
Yeah, so it emulates basic 10, but not the machine at a deep level. But that's cool if you want to play with basic 10, absolutely. But otherwise, again, go to the Mega 65 website and download the official XEMU emulator for the Mega 65, and that will let you do a whole lot more stuff than that.
So, what do you think of that? The high 65 implementation online there?
It's years and years since I last needed to use it, right? Because I've got the real hardware here in front of me, so I'm not overly qualified to comment.
Okay. So, in general, here's my last question, because I'm picking up all the other questions if anybody else had questions. Mm-hmm. But here's my last question. So, are you pleased with how far the Mega 65 has progressed so far at this time?
Yeah, and the simple answer to that is yes, right? That this is a machine that went from being a crazy idea of mine, and now it's there as you can buy it on the market, right?
Right.
That at a personal level, how many people actually get to build and release an 8-bit computer, and then to have one which is loved by the people who use it, and it works well, and people are making new software for it. I'm happy as a pig in mud to see where it's got to, and as I say, mostly because I'm actually seeing people just having reliving that joy of their younger years, in modern times that don't necessarily have as much joy to bring to many people.
Questions, everybody? Oh, here we are. Thomas, go ahead. Go.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Not very well. You might need to come closer.
Okay. Mike is right there.
How about now? How about now?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, cool. Hey, cool product, man. It's a cool project.
Thank you.
I'm glad it's manifesting for you. A couple of questions. One, it has a cartridge port, right?
Yes.
It takes
60 so
cartridges.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It takes C64 cartridges and. Sorry, say again.
Will it work with the Messiah cartridge?
Messiah.
Okay, so for some cartridges, we haven't got them working yet. There's actually an active push on this at the moment. Yeah. So the Messiah cartridge in particular does some weird stuff, and the authors haven't been able to fully explain to me what it does. I think possibly because it's a bit of copy protection stuff.
Right.
So that's proving a little bit resistant to work. Now that said, what we're doing is a remedy to that and a number of other cartridges is we're actually changing the flash menu at the moment. So when the Mega 65 turns on, it can choose which FPGA personality it wants to load from the flash that's on the motherboard. So by default, it'll be a Mega 65, but we're now adding flags into that. So you can say, if it detects a C64 cartridge is plugged in, then load a different core. And so we've already ported the Mr. C64 core. So within a few weeks, it'll be at the point where when you plug in a C64 cartridge, it goes, okay, well, you actually don't need it to be a Mega 65. You just need it to be the most compatible C64 that you possibly can. And we're hopeful that will get Messiah and a bunch of these other cartridges working.
Awesome. One more thing, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Does the SID is emulated, right?
Correct. The SID is implemented in the FPGA, yeah. So it's not yet perfect. We're in the process of porting a better one across. And so I think that the resid, there's a really nice, aftermarket SID that you can buy that's FPGA based. That in principle we can port 100% identically in there. But it already sounds pretty good, to be honest.
Yeah, but there's an expansion to that. It's that the new chips, the mock chips, the FPGA chips, they don't have the controls for paddles. Paul, the reason I'm asking all these things is because earlier you were talking about some cool kind of weird stuff to do with it audio-wise. As you know, 8-bit audio is like really big right now. I'm a DJ. 8-bit, Gen Z kids are into it, and the Messiah, what's cool is if you have a real 64 with a SID, you can use the Commodore or Atari paddle controllers as rotary dials. So are those commands supported on the FPGA?
Yeah. So you can already use paddle, and you can.
They're not on that SID. That
No. So the paddle interface, and also used for the 1351 mouse, is implemented directly in the Mega65. So when you read those registers from the SID on the Mega65, you're actually reading them from, if you like, dedicated circuitry that's there exactly to make sure that they just work. And in actual fact, you can read all 4 of them at the same time. They're not multiplexed like on the C64. There's separate ports where you can say, right, I want to read, pot A, X, and Y now. I want to read pot B, X, and Y. You don't have to wait that half a millisecond and fluff around with that. So what I would actually love to see, and I think is probably a better solution for many people than using the Messiah cartridge, is actually for some folks to actually write something like Messiah that runs natively on the Mega65. And then you can use all of the 4 SIDs. You can use the Amiga, you can play mod files on a Mega65 super easily, right?
Well, the big attraction is the MIDI combination, because it allows you to use external keyboards and to sequence.
And so again, I hope that the Messiah cart will get supported soon. But even if it doesn't, it wouldn't be very hard for folks to make actually a MIDI interface, right? Because you've got a standard C64 cartridge port, so you could support one of the existing MIDI carts that are out there, or we could very easily, design up a MIDI cartridge port so that you can replicate all of that functionality.
Cool, thanks, man.
That's right.
Other questions?
What's the price?
What's the price? So it's in direct from Trends in Europe, who are doing the manufacturing and sales for us. They're 666 euros plus whatever taxes you have to.
You have to sacrifice a goat in order to.
Yeah, so this is, as I was saying earlier, right? That having, because this thing has got a large it's not a 3D printed case; it's an injection molded case. It's got the mechanical keyboard. The FPGA part on it alone costs something like $300.
Wow.
So, right? Because you're actually getting a. Sorry, say again.
Robert has one here on display. It's beautiful.
Yeah, they are. We're really happy with the quality of the machine, and the fact that we've got that big FPGA and actually future-proofs it for, as we say, porting a whole pile of these other cores from Mister across as well. The other thing, actually, for DJing that might be kind of helpful, the 2 power LEDs, the power LED and the drive LED on the Mega65 are actually full programmable RGB LEDs, so you can do all kind of funky visual effects in there as well. Just to sweeten the deal, right? So yeah, we totally get the machine is not the cheapest retro machine that you can buy on the market at the moment, but by the same token, we don't think that anyone actually makes anything like it for a similar price either, right? And the miracles that we in the community have worked to get it that price down to that level, right? That Trends aren't making any money out of it. No one's making any money out of it. The community donated $75,000 US equivalent to get the injection molding tooling made for the case. GMK keyboards hunted through China to find a proper full 9
Other questions? Well, Paul, it is the end of our show for today. We are going off to dinner. We're going to close down the room and go off to dinner. And I guess you're going to go off and have breakfast over there in Adelaide?
Yeah, that's right. So it's 20 to 10 here in the morning. So, yep, I'll go and do stuff. But, I mean, if anyone has any questions that come up later, hop onto the Mega65 Discord server and, ask away. There's plenty of folks there. I'm often there myself as well. And, otherwise, enjoy dinner.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye. Excellent.
All right, how do I save this thing?
Hey, Robert, that's a wrap for today.
That's a wrap for today.
The Commodore Los Angeles Super Show.